Record. Okay, this is the HSML 4500 Diversity in Human Services Cultural Presentation for the Hispanic Diaspora Group. We have Brianna Burleson, Jermie Colyer, I'm Tiffany Faggins, and Miss Erica Scott. Our first presentation, our first slide, is going to be Brianna Burleson.
Okay, so this first slide is talking about the immigration and the origin of where basically Hispanics came from. And so it speaks about the displacement of the people and how when they decided that they were going to immigrate towards America, they came here basically for a better life and for better opportunities for themselves and their children. And so this slide basically talks about how when they immigrated, how it was a select few of them, and now going into this century and going into 2025, it's supposed to be more than 70% in most of the states that are in America, and it bases this off of Maryland, North Carolina, and Nebraska, which is a lot. And so this slide is just saying why they moved here, which was they wanted a better life. And they didn't want to take anything for granted, so they felt that this was the place to be for them and their offspring.
Okay. Our next slide is Jermie Colyer. He's going to tell us, where are they now?
For the where are they now slide, what I got is they're the second fastest growing ethnic group in America, with 17% of the population, about 57 million people in the country right now. They make up a large amount of the infrastructure for our country, as far as like the manpower for a lot of the jobs that we have. But they're one of the most discriminated groups in America. They with legislation like DACA coming out to help keep those the immigrants that they may not have been born here, but this is the only place that they know. And now we have a president now that is trying to take that away from them. That's one of the biggest things that they're going to face through right now.
Our next slide is one of my slides, and we're basically talking about the economic, political, educational, and legal strategies against Hispanics. There are several legal strategies that are used to basically cause societal subordination of this population. While not as heavily excluded from economic and social integration as African Americans are, Mexican origin persons have encountered severe racial barriers, which have structured opportunities for them. Scholars do argue that Mexican Americans lag educational and economical, advances, even after several generations of Hispanics being in the United States as a result of this treatment. This has been limited to mostly working class jobs from successfully integrating into middle class society. Mexican Americans have lower levels of education than non-Hispanic whites and blacks. And there has been an increase in anti-immigrant rhetoric for them. This rhetoric has basically motivated federal and state policies that exclude undocumented immigrants from access to health care, social services, while also still increasing the number of apprehensions and deportations, which is an increasing concern about the discrimination and racial profiling that this group basically has to go through. With the militarization of the U.S. border, this has altered patterns of the returns of the migration. Mexican migrants, in particular, are now less likely to return to Mexico as reentry is more dangerous for them. So that makes it where many undocumented immigrants have just resided in the U.S. for long periods of time because they're just simply unable to regularize their status with increasingly restrictive environments. Our next slide is going to be, our next 4 slides is going to be for Miss Erica Scott.
Describe the strength and resilience of this group and how it's been used to endure oppressive conditions. Well, as my classmates mentioned, the Mexican Americans are the largest minority, and they'll be the new majority in the next 10 to 15 years. The dominant race suggests that if they can't assimilate their ways to American culture, they should go back to Mexico or go back to their home countries if they can't speak English, if they can't embrace our culture. But oftentimes assimilation requires the minorities to reject or devalue their own culture. So a way that they have overcome and fought that oppression is that they have embraced our culture and also caused us to embrace theirs. Spanish is the second speaking most popular language in the world. So I feel like we should embrace being bilingual since they will be the new majority. Another way that they have fought their oppression is through education. They're disenfranchised because their cultural values and strengths, their heroes and their history is not celebrated or mentioned in the educational system. Over 83% of educators are white, while there are only 7% that are Latin. So if they could see that exposed more, it could empower them, it could strengthen them to be stronger and contribute to their upward mobility. Another way that they are, being oppressed is through access to housing, social programs, employment, and health insurance. That's a big disparity in the Hispanic community. Therefore, they're willing to endure dangerous conditions. They work some of the most dangerous jobs in the most intolerable temperatures, the most dangerous areas, and it's exhausting and physically demanding to them. And then they don't have insurance or those social structures to back them up. They're one of the most economically empowered groups, but the most socially disenfranchised population. But they are beginning to capitalize on their labor skills. They're mostly employed and largely employed in landscaping and housekeeping and construction and different labor markets. So now they are taking over those markets and able to employ some of their own people in their own race. And also in the workforce, being bilingual is an asset. Oftentimes people are paid more wages if they're bilingual and able to help that specific race. The last portion of their oppression that they are fighting against is that as they do grow to become the majority group, whiteness is no longer the normalcy. It's no longer mainstream because America is so diverse. We have to embrace all of these different cultures. So now they're seeing representation in their own spaces, like in the political arena with Joaquin Castro and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They have representation there to help the minorities. They also had organizations like La Raza Unida, which fought for social justice and for Mexican Americans to have more of a face and forefront in politics. LULAC is another organization, and they fight for civil rights, the advancements of the economy, education, and conditions, housing, health, and civil rights of the Latino community. And also, as earlier mentioned, the DREAM Act and DACA, which also protects minorities who are vulnerable to deportation.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Miss Brianna is going to tell us about some stereotypes that this group is associated with.
Okay, so a lot of the myths and the stereotypes of Hispanics and Mexicans are the fact that they cross the southern border illegally, and in most cases, a lot of them do not. Some of them, they have already lived here, and so people are already trying to ship them back over there when they were born here. Another one is that they're a drag on this economy, which is also false because, as said before, they pick up a lot of the jobs that nobody else wants to do. So they actually are helping the economy, and they have a lot of skills that a lot of people aren't willing to learn. And so with them having those skills, they actually are a build, which it says that 50% is really big, and that was in 2010. And the other issue that a lot of people try to play on is they assume that they do not want to learn English. That is false. It's not that they do not want to learn English. It is that English is hard, just like Spanish would be hard for some people. And so a lot of them do take classes to learn English, and sometimes it conflicts with their work schedules and their kids being picked up. But for the most case, a lot of them want to learn English. So that's just a few of the myths, and a lot of the other myths are deal with how they basically are not wanting to be a part of the American culture, which is false. A lot of them actually want to be a part of the American culture. It's just hard for them to be accepted by American people.
Thank you, Miss Brianna. Now we have Mr. Jermie. He's going to talk to us about some of the most significant ways in which the group differ in the U.S. society.
Some of the most significant ways the group differ in U.S. society. So the most of the U.S. population were more of an individual society. Most Hispanic families or most Hispanic people are more family oriented or group oriented people. It's very common to see them, gather around and have lunch together, especially with me and my profession. I work in the kitchen. I work with a lot of Hispanic people. They'll stop what they're doing and all gather around and eat with each other, and that's something that a lot of people in America don't do. They tend to band together for the good of all Hispanic people, not just to see what they can get out of for themselves, whatever it is that they're putting into. Another thing that I touched on was the religion aspect of a lot of Hispanic people are mostly Roman Catholics. I've met a lot of them that from like Venezuela or Cuba who practice Yoruba or Santeria, which is based out a West African religion in nature. But a lot of them are they don't really, like in America, we don't we have Catholics but our religion is kind of broken up into many different sectors, and that's one of the things that I've noticed or that I've read about while I was doing my part of the presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm going to be talking about the human service professionals' view on Hispanics. Basically, some things that we as professionals must consider are the issues related to family roles within that group, the relationships, the gender issues, as well as nurturing and disciplining the children, and even the roles of older adults. The father typically holds a position of respect and authority. The traditional view of manhood is strongly influenced by machismo, which is like a belief that men should be strong, brave, and honorable at all times. They should also protect and provide for their families. Machismo places men over women and gives males rights and privileges that may be commonly denied to women in this group, such as independence and authority. Many Hispanics in the U.S. no longer hold to this traditional view of machismo, and they're looking more towards a equal equality within their marriage. So I just think that it seems that the newer generation has kind of let that belief fall down and just kind of die away. um, this is found more with the older men and women, and even still some middle age groups, middle age people in that group. Our next slide is going to be by Miss Erica Scott again. And she's talking about some specific practice modalities or interventions that are congruent with the values of this oppressed group.
Thank you. As human services workers, we have to learn to be culturally competent and sensitive to the diverse cultures that we service. We have to pay attention to the individual's needs, the group needs, because oftentimes this group, Latinos and Mexican Americans, are considered second-class citizens. They don't get a lot of the regular human rights that we should get. So as far as us bridging the gap and being more effective human service workers, we can suggest English as a second language classes. That's free. Often free GED courses and classes are offered with that. We could refer them to places that offer free legal assistance to help them become naturalized or legal residents and citizens. We can work more in their communities, not always require them to come to our offices or in that professional setting. So we can go to their communities and their recreation centers and their churches, so we can be closer to them and make them feel more comfortable. We have to build stronger alliances by not being always so professional, stay close to our ethics, but also open those lines of communication to help them feel more comfortable. We can also volunteer. We can partner with community-based organizations and, again, churches and different nonprofit agencies that service this community. We could form partnerships with those agencies, work with them often, where we could share resources and referrals to help this population. And lastly, we could teach them how to self-advocate, how to ask for what they want, how to ask for what they want, who to ask for what they want, and not be afraid to ask for what they want. Just empower them and strengthen them.
Okay, thank you, Miss Erica. Brianna is going to discuss an issue of relevance and like a particular interest for females belonging to this group.
Okay, so a lot of things that pertain to the women in the Mexican and Latin culture is that they want to be an individual. And so it is hard for them because how they're raised. The man is supposed to take care of the house at all times, and they're supposed to stay home and take care of the children. But from what I was looking at, 42% of the Latino culture for women they're more interested in the jobs that men have, and they're very goal oriented, as their ancestors were not. So they prefer to not be in the household. Sometimes they actually prefer for the man to stay home, and they also want the cubicle jobs, the 9-to-5 jobs, to help their children not be able to go to school without a debt.
Okay, thank you, Miss Brianna. We also have Mr. Jermie again. He's going to talk to us about some action strategies recommended that are promoting social and economic justice for this group.
From what I was reading and what I've just observed from my own accounts with Hispanic people, for promoting social and economic justice, the best plan of action would be to continue the action they have been doing in the past. As a whole, Hispanic people aren't very wealthy in America, but they have, like I said earlier, they do have a few institutions in place to be self-sufficient. Grocery stores and small clinics and small businesses, etc. Um, Most of the injustices they face are usually based in fear and prejudice. That's why you know you you have like the dominant culture in America, or the dominant ethnicity in America sees them as a threat because they're growing so fast. Like I stated earlier, they're the second largest growing minority group in America, and on track to be the majority group in America. Um, that's why most of the social injustices they face are, like I said, based in fear and prejudice. But the current president wouldn't have won without them, honestly, because they made up 29% of his votes, and that's approximately 14 million people and voted for him. But even though with the rhetoric that he's put out about them, they still supported him. So like their political and economic power will help push them for the changes that they want to see in America, or for their community.
Thank you, Jermie.
Yep. Is that my last slide?
Yes.
All right, I got to go back to work.
Okay. For our personal interview, we did a interview on a young lady named S. Cantu. She's a Hispanic female who's been in the U.S. since she was a teenager. She initially left from Mexico due to the drug trafficking and gang-related issues that she was basically going through in her community. She did have a difficult time getting used to school here when she first came because her English was very limited. She was able to find help through her school district for Hispanic families, and counselors kind of put her family in a better place as far as her parents. They did not have jobs lined up before coming here. One of her biggest concerns now as an adult is for her young children. She has 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. To attend primarily English-speaking schools. And English is more of their second language at home. That's, not their primary language. She still likes to speak in her native tongue. But her husband is an illegal immigrant. He is a worker here in construction. And he has been subject to some of the ICE operations on many occasions, but he's been able to avoid it just basically by being at lunch or being in a higher place within the building doing some work. Sandra is a medical assistant here, and she went to school here for medical assistant as well. If something was to happen with her husband where he would be deported, she would have a hard time providing for her family of three. Both of her parents are here also, and they're elderly, so they all live together. Um, if something was to happen to him, it would be devastating for her. She does not participate in any um, programs, government assistance programs. She just said that she really just never even thought about it because she just didn't want to give up so much information that her family has. And I think the more that they dug, that shunned her away from applying for those programs. So they have worked, different odd jobs. Even her grandmother, not her grandmother, but her mother sells tamales. And, she makes homemade tamales and she sells tamales. Her dad does some small yard work, but not much because, like I said, they're both elderly. And they basically just help her husband and her watch the kids when they have to go to work and things like that, and just kind of be a support system. Her parents do not speak any English. So if something was to happen to them, they would not know really what to do here in America, in Texas, just because they don't have the resources that they would need to be able to move on and to try to even rebuild their lives here. So that was our personal interview. And these are our references. And again, this has been our HSML 4500 Diversity in Human Services Cultural Presentation Directions. And I want to say thank you to my group members. They did an awesome job. I am proud of everybody and their work. And everyone participated, and it was a challenge, but we got through it. So thank you, Brianna Burleson. Thank you, Miss Erica Scott. And thank you, Mr. Jermie Colyer.
Thank you as well, Tiffany, for taking the initiative in a lot of areas and keeping us on our toes.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, too.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.